Hi, and welcome to today's Engaging for Missouri webinar. I'm Alice Roach from the Division of Applied Social Sciences at the University of Missouri, and I'll be your host today. So with this webinar series, we intend to facilitate a discussion focused on research-based insights that leaders like you can apply in your own work to benefit and strengthen the state's agriculture and food system, hospitality sector, and communities. Today we have Alan Spell joining us to present about Missouri economy indicators. Before I invite Alan to begin, I want to share a few housekeeping notes. First, we'll close the webinar today with a question and answer session. Those of you who are connected to the webinar today via your computer, you can submit your questions in the chat screen. To open the chat, just click the chat button in the menu at the bottom of your screen. If you joined by phone, then you can email me questions at roacham@missouri.edu. Second, all attendees are muted and may not start their video. Third, if you encounter any technical difficulties, then please let me know by submitting a comment in the chat screen, or you can send me an email at roacham@missouri.edu. Fourth, we will make a recorded version of the webinar available to you. You can look for an email from Zoom that shares more about where you can access that recorded copy, and you can look for that follow-up email in about a day from now. So now we'll transition to the topic of today's webinar titled COVID-19 Missouri Economy Indicators Update. Presenting on this topic is Alan Spell, who is an assistant extension professor and part of MU Extension's Exceed Regional Economic and Entrepreneurial Development Program. Thank you, Alan, for being here today. If you could please start your video, then we can begin your presentation.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you all for being here today. I know it's difficult keeping connected with all the information that's going on, and we're really glad to be able to offer this series to update you on some economic indicators and to continue the discussion around our industries and what those impacts may be. So we only have a few minutes, so I'm going to get started and go into some of the interesting facts that we've looked at. So the COVID-19 health and economic concerns, of course, are still unfolding. This as a global health pandemic has impacted, obviously, much of the world. I think in the US, we're at 86,000 confirmed cases and about 1,300 fatalities. In Missouri, I believe we're around 500 cases. So it is something that, of course, first and foremost is this health concern that we have, and the primary thing that's actually causing what we're having to look at now, the economic impacts. This is one of the times, rare time in our country where we know the economy is going to suffer, and we did that on purpose to save lives. So with that in mind, and keeping the larger concerns of our citizens and our economy in mind, we'll dive into a few of the details today that can impact Missouri. So only time will tell how much damage is going to be done to our economy. One, we don't know how long this situation will last. Obviously, the longer it lasts, the more that economic damage will happen. We don't have a recent experience of this scale to draw from, so it's really hard to draw parallels from some of our past experiences, whether it was the recession in 2008 and 9, or the 9/11 events, or past recessions before that. So it really is hard to draw hard conclusions. We'll do a little bit of that today, but again, with some caveats. Economic indicators like jobs and income, GDP, and so forth that we get from federal and state agencies are going to lag. That's just the nature of that data. It's going to lag until we have more information. And of course, a lot of times the figures that we want to look at, the state and local figures by city, by county, are not always available, even when that information does come in. So we're flying blind a little bit, and our hope with this is to kind of start unpacking some of that information. So this is the very first in the series to explore some of the economic indicators. We started with some weekly indicators, things that are unfolding weekly. Obviously, it's changing, and even the update that was released earlier this week, there's some updated figures. It changes so fast, so we're trying to start with some weekly indicators. And then look at other things that might be of value as well. Now, often this is from private sector firms. We don't have a lot of government data at the time, so we're relying on some of the larger data firms that are out there, some of the industry associations that have developed data and know information from their own businesses. And then at the end, of course, we want to highlight some resources that are available to businesses. This is not a time when there's a lot of positive economic news, obviously, and we don't want this to be seen as just a report about some of the dour side of our economy and the indicators. We do also want to turn and hopefully show some of the highlights that are available for businesses so that as you go out there, you can promote some of these resources. And you know, there is an end to this. We don't know when that'll be, but there is an end. So we want to obviously help our businesses as they look to face this situation. So just to ground us first off in the numbers that we have on the Missouri economy right now, payroll non-farm employment is about 2.9 million. We're looking at year-over-year growth, that's the YOY, of about 6% compared to the US, which was growing a little bit faster at 1.6%. So nearly 3 million people employed. Payroll non-farm, so this is not farm employment, this is the companies that have employees, large, vast majority of our companies out there in employment. It is a survey of about 145,000 businesses in the US every month. So it's that type of survey that we have every month to look at those job numbers. And the reference week is usually the second week of the month. So for March, when we get those March numbers, we actually will be getting numbers that are pre some of the big hits that our economy is taking in terms of jobs. So it really will be the April report before we start seeing the March numbers. There'll be revised March numbers that'll be shown at that time. We also know that the unemployment rate is 3.5%, which is what the US rate is. And so that's obviously been a good point for us. And now we're facing, just yesterday, the US report of initial claims going from 282,000 to 3.3 million. So over tenfold increase. Missouri went up from 4,000 to 40,000, also a tenfold increase. So you'll hear me talk about a lot of the things that Missouri does is in relation to the US. So in other words, when the US goes down in terms of the economy, Missouri follows. We're a very diverse state. We mirror the US in our diversity. And also a lot of our indicators mirror the US as well. So when we see indicators for the whole US, a lot of times it's a really good proxy for what's going to happen here in Missouri as well. Our quarterly gross domestic product, our last track on that was the quarter of 2019 third quarter. So it lags by a couple quarters. And at that time, we had 292 billion in gross domestic product. And that had grown at an annualized rate of 2.4%, so slightly faster than the US rate at that time. So obviously those numbers, we won't get until later summer to find out what's happening right now. So we focused this brief really on the hospitality sector and specifically hotels, but I just wanted to kind of ground you in what that employment looks like for Missouri. So hotels and restaurants are seeing this impact now. We know that the travel industry, the leisure industry is the first industry to really see these impacts. Small retail, the fast food services, all these type of entities are really seeing this impact right now. It's important because in the state of Missouri, about 270,000 people are employed in this industry. And it's growing, and it had been growing. The last check in February, it had grown at 1.7%, which was actually faster than all private sector employment. So it's a big growing industry. Represents about 11% of our private sector employment. So it's a fairly substantial sized industry. So one of the data sources that is used for hotel tracking is a firm called STR, and they track global data on hotels. And their report last week was really eye-opening. Occupancy rates, this is as of the second week in March, occupancy rates had dropped by nearly a quarter, and we're at 53%. So half the rooms were filled. I just looked this morning, it's down to 30%. So it's dropped even more drastically in the last week. Revenue per available room is down 32.5%. That was the second week in March. When I checked this morning, it was actually down closer to 70%, so double that. So our occupancy rates now at 30, revenue available per room now at 70, but it's just dropping really fast. And that's seen in the Wall Street Journal, for example, just a couple of days ago, Marriott running 75% below normal levels, Hilton furloughing thousands of workers. So we're seeing that impact right now. The Oxford Economics did a quick analysis for the American Hotel and Lodging Association. That's the largest association for this industry, and looked at post 9/11, and their occupancy rate went down to about 60%. So we're double that now at 30%. And there was 400,000 jobs lost at that time. And they looked at it post-recession or during the recession and after that, and then have done some preliminary numbers with the COVID-19. And I just, this is of course national, but they are looking down at 25% occupancy rates. Now, again, we're at 30%, so we're getting close to that now. The analysis will continue to evolve, but it's certainly for that industry a huge impact. After 9/11, we took a look at the taxable sales. So from the Department of Revenue, you can look back at back into the 1990s even for taxable sales. And the industries that were looked at were hotels in this case. Looked at the 3 months following 9/11, what happened to taxable sales. So that's an indicator, obviously, of how much sales are going on in these industries. As a whole, all sectors that collected taxable sales were down in that 3 months by just over 1%. Hotels were down by 11.4%. So that was a substantial difference in that, 33 million in decline in terms of taxable sales. Now that's inflation adjusted, so that is an inflation adjusted figure there. But I also wanted to note a couple of things here. One, we were in a recession at that time. It was a milder recession, but that's obviously playing into this. And of course, the COVID-19 situation appears to be something that's going to be longer lasting, and so we have to worry about those impacts being longer lasting than this. Now, for comparison, STR did some charts, and this one showed the China economy, Italy's economy and the U.S. economy. And China's about 2 months ahead of us in terms of what's happened there. And so they dropped down to the single digits in terms of occupancy rates. And that's something that that definitely could be in our future. We were last week coming close to that 50%, and now we're at the 30% rate. And looking at the webinar that SDR did just yesterday, at 30%, if we're heading down to the single digits, we're heading down at a slower rate than China did. Now, China's starting to recover after about 2 months. Their occupancy rates are, I think, up near the 22 or 3% now. So, on the one hand, that's a country that locked down things very tight quickly and has started to see some rebounding. But the U.S., if we're still at 30% occupancy, that means 3 out of 10 rooms are still getting rented and people are still traveling. So that might mean that we might not lock down as fast as China did. Now, STR also had an interesting slide around the different types of declines. Hotels in urban areas saw the biggest decline, airports, as you can imagine. Smaller towns and interstate hotels, more of the transient type of hotel users saw a decline as well, but less than in the urban areas. And they showed by the top 25 metros just last week the decline in revenue per available room. Seattle, San Francisco, Houston, topping that. The St. Louis was up there pretty high as well. So that's of course Missouri and the Illinois side, the metro there. The purple is the group rooms, which is 10 or more rooms. So that's your conferences and so forth. Just yesterday at their briefing, SCR said that is down to 1% nationally. So basically conferences and group room rentals have dropped off to nearly 0%. No one is having conferences anymore. Transient travel is more of your people picking up hotel rooms, less than 10. So it's going to be your smaller groups or just individuals traveling. So that's dropped off as well. Next, we'll turn to movie sales. Movie sales is another indicator, again, of group behavior and how sales have been impacted. Last week, cumulative ticket sales were down almost 13% from the year prior. I know the numbers are coming out this morning for this week, and I know that they'll be substantially down from last week, because during last week we had a lot of movie theaters closing down voluntarily or to restrictions. So it will probably drop off a cliff, basically, with that number here. And I want to show you this chart down here to kind of highlight where movie theaters were already at in 2020 and 2019. You've got the past 4 years there, 2016, 17, 18, and 19. You could see revenues, cumulative revenues by week. In this case, week 11, 2020 was already starting to drop, but it was already lower in 2019. And a lot of that has to do with the competition from streaming services that are coming along. So basically, movie theaters are already facing some revenue pressures, and this will obviously be a huge impact. So helpful resources, the Missouri Small Business Development Centers, of course, are around in many parts of the state and are there to help and assist small businesses as they're trying to grow their business, start their business, but in times like this, try to manage what is happening in their business right now. So there's a nice resource there, and that link is to it, but if you just did Missouri SBDC and coronavirus, you'll find this. It's been updated with some links to some helpful articles, some helpful tips. I know there's a lot of resources out there. It's hard to know where everything's at, but they're trying to put a lot of the most pertinent stuff there. So I want you to be aware of that. Industry specific, the American Hotel and Lodging Association has some tips for their members. You do have to be a member to log in, but I imagine most hotel owners are. So that's a resource that hotel industry can be aware of. So there's a couple things here before we wrap up. One, we're going to look at future indicators as well. We don't know exactly which ones we're going to target. It could be restaurants and the issues they face. We have a lot of interest, obviously, in restaurants and how they're faring. A large part of that accommodation and food services number that I showed you, the 260,000, the vast majority of that's in food services, so they're impacted pretty severely. The initial unemployment insurance claims are obviously of interest. We saw that number go up by tenfold this week, and so that's something that watching which industries and occupations are hit significantly by that. And then, of course, the monthly current employment statistics will be something that comes out. It's going to have that lag, though, so it'll be a month or two before we see those March numbers and then what's happening there. Now, we also have a quiz, not a quiz, maybe a quiz is the wrong word, but we have a selection to allow you to poll and see which indicators you would be most interested in the future. Tourism-related industries, healthcare, manufacturing, urban and rural industry distinctions, or macroeconomic indicators. We wanted to try this out. It's the first time we've done this, and so hopefully you can vote for which one you would be most interested in. We'll take this information here and help inform what we do in the future in terms of looking at some indicators. A lot of states are doing some really important work, and I know here in Missouri, state agencies, Federal Reserve, and St. Louis and Kansas City, a lot of folks are looking into this information. So we just want to make sure that we're hearing from you. So if you wouldn't mind, select an indicator that you're most interested in, and we'll see at the end what the poll says.
So we'll give you a few more seconds to respond to our poll, and then we'll close the poll and share the results with everyone.
All right, well, we have the results here. We have pretty even in most of the indicators, except the largest one by far is urban and rural industry differences. And that's, so that's interesting. And we know that in non-metro areas, they have a different mix of industries and different populations there. So that will be something that we can consider looking into. Well, thank you all. I appreciate the chance to present this to you, understanding this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of looking at some of the analysis that's out there, some of the industries, but we wanted to get this information put together in a nice format and also share this obviously, but share resources, share other things that we know about the data out there, and to hear from you about sources that you know of. So
Well,
now I think we can take some
Alan.
questions.
Yeah, we're ready for questions. So if you do have a question, again, please submit it in the chat screen. You can click the chat button in your menu ribbon and see that to open, or you can also submit an email to me at roacham@missouri.edu. Alan, one question that we received was specific to hospitals, and Mike was wondering whether there was any information available on the financial health and the future of Missouri's hospitals, because he's heard that many are in trouble due to some various factors.
I bet you there is. I don't know offhand what that data is. I saw just the other day in the Wall Street Journal, they had an article, and I can't remember what federal agency did this, but it was looking at intensive care beds per region. And it was very large regions. I think Missouri was split up into 3 or 4 spots, but things like that were helpful, at least in terms of the beds. In terms of the financial health, I'm not sure, but that's something I can definitely look into.
Great. We also have another question about perhaps sectors that are doing well. You pointed out 2 sectors that were having some challenges, hospitality and then also movie theaters. What are some sectors that are doing well, though, and what can those sectors potentially contribute to their communities in order to help some of those businesses that are going through some challenges right now?
Well, the grocery stores are doing well. We're going there a lot to get supplies and food services there. The logistics side of things, distribution, warehousing, and so forth, because we're ordering online. Online sales are going up, so online companies are doing relatively better, and that's kind of the grocery stores and online firms are already doing some of this type of. We're already dabbling, I guess, in delivering food and doing things like that, but they were only dabbling. And now they're really going full tilt at this to try to understand what's happening. So those are some that are doing well. Restaurants that are that have dine-in, that are usually dine-in places that can also offer carry-out food, drive-through, and so forth. Those type of firms are not doing as well as they were doing, but at least are able to get some income by doing having food served that way. It's a small part of what the larger sales is for these companies, and restaurants run on really tight margins anyway, so it's certainly not a large scale thing that's going to help them, but at least it's something that's being helpful. Apart from that, professional services type of industries where people are more used to having office type works, laptop works, accounting firms, law firms where you can basically work remotely are going to be in better shape than obviously firms that rely on that customer traffic coming through there. So, and so many, you hear when you watch the news daily about different companies or industries trying to do something to help. I heard the other day about distillers that aren't able to really sell a lot of their distilled spirit products right now, but they can turn their operations into sanitize make it sanitary liquids for hand wipes. And so that's one way to kind of turn into a different use of your resources. Just a few examples.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for that. And we have another question about whether there's renewed interest in encouraging local food production and reducing reliance on national supply chains for food.
Yeah, I don't know that. I know Sarah Lowe, who leads the Exceed team, has done a lot of work into food chains and so forth. So maybe at a later time we can dive a little bit more deeper into that. Farmers markets face the same challenge of the gathering of 10 or more people, and so it's that's one challenge that has just kind of knocked everybody off of normal routines and how we can get food purchased. So it's really kind of hard to tell at this point how if long-term supply chains will be impacted by this. On the one hand, this seems like we're in the depths of something that could last for a while, but it may not. I mean, this may be 2 or 3 months, and we're getting back to a managed place where people are starting to buy again and move around again and do things. And that'll, of course, we've lost money at some of these places that are servicing traffic daily, but there's a lot of income that's still in the economy. Companies are saving their cash, so we will have money to spend and to do things. So it just depends on how long this situation drags out.
Right. We have another question here about mentioning that there are a lot of layoffs that we're hearing about right now in hospitality and food and beverage industries. What industries are recruiting right now? So employees who have been laid off can look to those industries that are actively recruiting.
Some of the ones that I've heard of, and again, are the ones that are doing the warehousing, the distribution type of activities, grocery stores, and Walmart and Target, I think have a high online presence. Amazon, I heard, is hiring a lot. Of course, you've got to be near an Amazon facility. So, distribution and warehousing has been an industry that has been increasing in Missouri. We have had an increase in distribution centers, warehousing. Those places may be around, in different parts of the state. It might be a resource to look at hiring because people are ordering online. We still have income. We still need to buy things, and so going online means you've got to get that stuff through a distribution center.
Sure. I have a question about how consumer behaviors may be changing because of these stay-at-home orders and remote work. So to what extent do you think that people staying at home and maybe using services like DoorDash or Uber Eats that they haven't used previously, does their participation in using those types of channels now potentially lead them to using those channels more in the future? And will that potentially shift consumer behavior going forward?
I think the short answer is yes. I think it will. I mean, we're getting an unfortunate crash course in doing this. We know from, for example, with grocery stores, they were really into a lean process of keeping just what they needed on hand, and that was cutting down costs. But now you come with a situation like this, and you're running out of supplies, and so supply chains are having to alter. People are getting more used to ordering things online, and so that behavior probably won't, change drastically it will change back to buying things locally, but we've started this newer behavior, more people getting comfortable ordering online, and that will probably continue on to some level. And looking at things like things like hotels and restaurants, you're still going to eat out. Restaurant sales have been going out. We as consumers have been choosing to eat at restaurants more and more through the last couple of decades. So we're still going to do that. It's just that we may also be more comfortable just ordering and having stuff delivered to us as well. Although I can tell you, as one person who's been cooped up in a house for a long time, I can't wait to go to a restaurant and sit down and eat and enjoy some nice company.
Right. I'm sure others feel the same way right now. I guess one more question to wrap up today. In the indicators update, you did point out some differences, or rather how the economy responded to 9/11 as an example for a point of comparison. So what makes 9/11 different from the crisis we're in now? And then how might the response to that crisis now be different from what we saw in 9/11?
That's an excellent question. So in 9/11, we had this terrible shock to the U.S. and to our economy, and it did really lock down travel temporarily, airports and security, and then of course that impacted into hotels, and we saw those numbers impacting Missouri as well. What was probably substantially different at that time, apart from the recession, we were already in that mild recession, but really the consumer, after that attack, we basically felt like as the United States, we needed to go out there and show the world that we were still going to go ahead and have our economy moving along. We weren't going to be, weren't going to be stopped from enjoying the things that we enjoyed in our lives. So we went out to restaurants, we went out and bought stuff. We basically tried to show the world that we were a resilient economy, and we're going to buy things and do things. And so that was a great proactive response to a bad situation. Here, we can't really do that. We can't really go out and shove our fist up at the COVID virus and say we're going to go out and eat more and do things like that. We just don't have that same scenario here. The other thing is that this, unfortunately, this one, while it's going to peak here hopefully soon, and we'll see it drop down, it also has the chance to revisit us in the fall. So that can also linger those impacts longer. I'm hopeful that we'll be developing systems more over this time period before a fall hits, that we'll be prepared for that. But that's another thing that can elongate this process.
Yeah, great perspective there. Well, thank you, Alan, for sharing today's webinar presentation, and thank you to our audience too. When you exit Zoom, you'll see a post-webinar survey will load in your web browser. If you could please consider responding to that survey, we'll use the results to improve the webinar experience and also brainstorm future webinar topics. Watch your email for access to the recorded copy of today's webinar. Again, I'll try to have that out to you within a day or so. On Monday, we'll resume our Engaging for Missouri webinar series. At that time, Dr. Patrick Westhoff with FAPRI will speak about the COVID-19 relief bill and its implications for rural America. We'll share registration information for next week's webinars shortly. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great day. Thanks again, Alan.
Thank you.